You have zero memories of your first 3 years of life. Not because they weren't important, not because you didn't experience them. You lived through thousands of hours. You learned language. You learned to walk. You learned to recognize faces. You formed attachments. Your brain was working at maximum capacity, but you remember nothing. A 40-year-old can recall adolescence that happened 25 years ago. A 15-year-old can barely remember age 2, even though it was only 13 years prior. Time doesn't explain the gap. So what happened to those 3 years? The answer is darker than forgetting. It's that your brain actively deleted them.
First, understand what you're dealing with. The average earliest memory is around 3.5 years old. Some people push it back to 2. A few report memories from before that, but almost nobody, genuinely almost nobody, has real memories from their first year of life. This isn't normal forgetting. Forgetting is when you remember something once and then it fades. This is different. You've never remembered your first birthday. You didn't forget it. You never stored it in the first place. Scientists call it infantile amnesia, sometimes childhood amnesia. The names sound harmless. The reality is unsettling. Because your brain wasn't immature, it was making memories. Infants as young as 12 months old can encode episodic memories, real, detailed memories. fMRI scans show babies' brains lighting up when they recognize images they've seen before. Infants can imitate sequences of actions. They can remember autobiographical events from up to 6 months prior. Your brain was working. It was just deciding not to let you keep any of it. So the question becomes obvious. If your brain can form memories at 1 year old, why can't you access them at age 25? There are 3 main theories. The first is immature hippocampus. The hippocampus is the brain's memory filing cabinet. Maybe it's just not fully developed enough to create lasting storage. But this theory has a problem. We know infants are forming memories. The filing cabinet is open. Something else is closing it. The second theory is language. Maybe memories require language to stick. Words give memories structure. Without language, experiences just scatter. But this doesn't fully explain it either. Toddlers who can speak still lose those memories. The third theory is the one that's gained the most support. And it's the one that reveals something truly dark about how your brain works. It's called the neurogenesis hypothesis, and it explains everything. Your brain does something almost no other organ does. It keeps manufacturing new neurons your entire life. But during infancy and early childhood, it does this at a rate that's almost frantic. Your hippocampus is producing new brain cells at a rate so intense, it's creating thousands of new neurons every single day. Researchers at Yale and Toronto and around the world have found something remarkable. When they suppress neurogenesis in infant mice, chemically stopping the production of new neurons, the mice suddenly perform like adults on memory tests. They remember things. The forgetting stops. But when they stimulate neurogenesis in adult mice, accelerating neuron production, the adults develop amnesia. They start forgetting. The inverse relationship is almost perfect. High neurogenesis equals memory loss. Low neurogenesis equals memory stability. Basically, your brain is manufacturing new neurons at such a rapid rate that when those new neurons integrate into existing circuits, they destabilize the old memories. New neurons are replacing the connections that stored your early experiences. Your memories aren't being forgotten, they're being overwritten. This is where it gets uncomfortable, because if this is true, if your brain is deliberately erasing early childhood, there has to be a reason evolution did this. Think about what a 3-year-old brain needs to do. It needs to learn language rapidly. It needs to learn social rules. It needs to absorb cultural information at maximum speed. It needs neuroplasticity, the ability to rewire itself based on environment. An adult brain doesn't need that. An adult brain prioritizes stability. It wants memories. It builds permanent structures. But a developing brain needs to be constantly remoldable. It needs to be able to forget old patterns and absorb new ones. If a 3-year-old's brain kept all its early memories in stable storage, it would become rigid. The circuits would solidify. Learning would slow down. The brain would be optimized for persistence instead of growth.
So evolution made a trade. It said, we will give you an incredibly plastic brain that forgets everything so you can learn anything. You are neurologically rebuilt every few years of childhood. The person you were at 2 years old, that person is gone. Not metaphorically, literally. The neural connections that made up your consciousness have been overwritten.
But here's the part that's genuinely unsettling. The memories don't completely disappear. Research in rats and primates shows that even though episodic memories, conscious narrative memories vanish, a latent trace remains. The memory is still encoded somewhere. It's just inaccessible to consciousness. Which means something extraordinary happens. Early childhood trauma leaves an imprint. If you were neglected at age 2, you won't remember being neglected. You'll have no narrative memory of it. But your amygdala, the fear center of your brain, will remember. Implicit memories will remain. You'll develop anxiety around separation. You'll struggle with attachment. You'll react to triggers you can't explain. Scientists have documented this directly. Adults who experienced early trauma have higher rates of PTSD, depression, anxiety, and self-harm for events they have no conscious memory of ever experiencing. You can be traumatized by something that happened before memory began. The experience shaped your neural circuits before those circuits were even accessible to consciousness. This explains something that haunted psychology for decades, the recovered memory phenomenon. In the 1980s and 90s, therapists would use hypnosis and guided imagery to help patients recover traumatic memories from early childhood. People would remember abuse that had been repressed, and these memories would feel completely real. The emotions were genuine, the details were vivid. But many of those memories were false. Not because people were lying, but because the brain can create false memories, especially when a therapist is subtly suggesting what the memory should be. The brain generates a narrative to fill the gap left by childhood amnesia, which means something even stranger is possible. You might carry the emotional weight of a trauma you experienced but never consciously knew happened. And you might also generate false memories to explain that weight. You might remember being abused in ways that never actually occurred, not because you're broken, but because your brain is trying to make sense of emotional residue it received before consciousness emerged.
So what's the practical implication of all this? You are not the person you think you are. The identity you feel is continuous, an unbroken thread from birth to now. But neurologically, you've been completely rebuilt multiple times. The person who learned to walk is gone. The person who spoke your first words is gone. The person who formed your earliest attachments, that person no longer exists. What remains is the pattern, the emotional template, the implicit memories, the neural networks that were already forming when the conscious ones were deleted. Which means you might be carrying the shape of your early childhood in ways you'll never consciously understand. You react to a particular type of person and don't know why. You feel abandonment disproportionate to the situation. You struggle with trust even with people who've never betrayed you. You have phobias that have no origin story you can point to. These are imprints from a person you were, someone whose memories you're not allowed to access, someone who shaped the neural circuits you're using right now to read these words. The cruelest part of childhood amnesia is this. You spent the first 3 years of your life learning how to be human. You absorbed language, social rules, attachment patterns, survival instincts. All of that shaped you fundamentally, but you're not allowed to remember it. You can't go back and understand what you learned or why. You can't see the formative moments that made you who you are. You can't remember the people who raised you when they mattered most. Instead, you carry forward their influence as a ghost, as implicit memory, as patterns you follow without understanding why you follow them. And the most unsettling part? This isn't a glitch. This is what evolution wanted. Your brain sacrificed continuity of identity for the ability to learn. You had to be forgotten so you could be rebuilt. You had to lose your past to have a future, which means in a very real sense, you died before you were old enough to remember living. The person you think you are, the continuous self stretching back to birth, that person never existed. You're a series of selves, each one overwriting the last, each one carrying the influence of the previous one, but never able to remember it. You're haunted by who you were, and you'll never know what they knew.